The source of our learning should be Panacea. Let's start 81. Nit Mashalim, 81b. Start at the Mishnah. Nit Mashalim, Arubad. Talking about the Korban Pesach. And we're going to make distinctions here. When a Korban Pesach becomes puzzle, what type of psul is there? Is it in the animal? Is it in the blood? Or is it in the owners? So that's going to make a difference on how we treat this invalidated sacrifice. So if the animal becomes tamei, or the majority of the animal becomes tamei, you burn it on the side of the outside the temple, but you use the wood from the arrangement of the fire, which means from the wood that would have been used for the maracha, that would have been used to burn the Korban Pesach on the Mizbeach, that you can use it. They when it was consecrated, they had in mind that for people that their sacrifice would be invalid, they could also use it to burn it outside the temple, on the mountain. Nitma mute. Let's say just a little bit became tamei, not the whole sacrifice. A small piece of the sacrifice became tamei. Or some of the sacrifice was left over till the morning. So then, they burn it in their courtyards or on their rooftop, stone, of course. And they use their own wood. Hatziknin, these are the miserly people. They don't want to spend their own money. So, they burn it in front of the temple to get the benefits of using the wood from the Mizbeach. They don't have to get their own wood. Yeah, this is like someone told me he figured out how to eat for free. He goes to McDonald's and he takes the ketchup and he adds hot water and he has tomato soup and it's all for free. Anyway, these guys, they have their korban to burn, but they're going to the Beis HaMikdash to get the wood, which is given to them, and they burn it over there. Okay. My time, the Gemara asks, what's the reason why the sacrifice is burned? L'fnei abira. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina kedei levaishan. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says, in order to embarrass them. They obviously did something wrong. They weren't careful with the korban. So to embarrass them, they have to burn it in front of the temple. Now, as a sort of compensation for that, they're allowed to use the wood from the temple. Okay. Nitma mute.
We talked a few days ago about how an item could become tamei between the shechting and the zrika.
Right.
And the answer was sheretz. Sheretz can land on anything, anytime.
Right.
So why is it an embarrassment if a sheretz landed on them?
They have to go to the temple in front of everyone to burn it. You know, I don't know, let's say someone misses Yalaviyavai on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is tonight. Imagine if they said, if you forget to say Yalaviyavai, you have to daven to the Yamad and, and repeat your Shemon Esrei out loud. They don't do that. You could say it's whatever. But here, they're saying, no, you had a korban. You weren't careful with it. You're a sheretz, you allowed a sheretz to come in contact with it. Go burn it in front of the temple. Yeah.
So he's supposed to cut out the innards himself, the kidneys and all the stuff that's going to be.
No, he's burning he's burning the flesh of the sacrifice. He took the sacrifice home.
He's roasting it for eating? That he did on
No.
his own anyway.
Yeah, he brought it home to eat.
Uh-huh.
And while he was there, he wasn't careful, and it touched the sheret.
Mm-hmm.
They say go back to the temple and burn it.
Mm-hmm.
Over roast.
Mm-hmm.
Burn it by the temple.
So this is after it come back into his possession to deal with properly. Okay,
yeah, that's what it seems like.
Okay, thank you.
What about nitma miyutai? If just a little bit of the sacrifice became home, we said no, you can do that you can do at home. For minnow, there was another.
If you did only a little bit of the sacrifice came from it,
you can burn it at home. Yeah,
you don't have to be.
that's just a minor mistake. Yeah, it's a small mistake. It wasn't like the big contamination of the whole sacrifice. The Gemara has a question. Someone that is traveling, he left Yerushalayim. He remembers that he has sacrificial meat along with him. If he passed Mount Scopus, Scopus, he has to burn. He burns it right there because they don't bother him to go all the way back because he's already passed it. Officially, you're supposed to burn any invalidated sacrifice for any reason. You're supposed to burn it in the place where it's eaten. So if it's supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim, you burn it in Yerushalayim. If it's supposed to be eaten in the Azara, you would have to go back and burn it over there. You're not going to bring it into the Azara. But we learn in the place of eating, that's where it's burned. Here, they're lenient on him because he's already so far away. Vimlav, however, if he's not so far away, then he goes back and burns it in front of the temple. Now, from the wood of the temple. Now, this seems like even if it's only a small amount of the sacrifice, it just said Basar Kodesh. It doesn't say he has the whole sacrifice. Even if it's a minority amount of the sacrifice, he still goes back. You said that, a small amount you can burn in your house. Now we're sending him back to the base of Mikdash to burn a small amount.
But is there a difference between?
Go for it.
There's a difference between the Korban Pesach and Basar. Well, no, there's Basar that's called it. And then, in other words, not in the not in the sacrifice themselves, but in the method.
There are differences. There are differences, but we're dealing with a Korban Pesach is Kachi Kalam.
Right.
Other sacrificial meat is Kachi Kalam, probably. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been in Yerushalayim. It would have been stayed in the Azara. It's Kachim Kalam as well. So, when it comes to it becoming invalidated, where do you burn it? That should be the same. And it turns out that you have to go back to the Temple Mount. Amar Rav Chama Bar Ukva. Rav Chama Bar Ukva gives an answer like Kasha. The two statements here are not a contradiction. The Mishnah, and then the Brisa. Maybe a Mishnah as well. I don't remember. It says, he gives the answer like this. Kan ba'achsnai kan balabayas. Depends if he's a guest or if he's a homeowner. If he's a guest, he doesn't have his own wood. So we don't make him go find wood and all of that. If he has a house, so go use your own wood and you can burn it wherever. But if you don't have your own wood, so then you can go back to the temple to burn it there. Our Mishnah is talking about a balabayas. He has his own wood. He burns it in his house. The guest doesn't have his own wood. He burns it by the temple with their wood. Rav Papa says, Hava haba achsanai. Both talking about guests. Kan shechsek padera, kan shleichsek padera. If he's on the road, then it's very hard to go find wood. So we say, okay, just turn around and go back to the temple. We think it's the other way. But if he's not on the road, then we say, okay, you can already go find wood. You have extra time. When you're traveling, it's hard. You have to go off the path to go start searching for wood. That's a big job. But if you're at home, it's not at home. He's a guest with free time. So with leisure time, so we say, go get wood and burn it in wherever you're staying. Rav Zvid goes back to the interpretation of Rav Chama Bar Chanina that the difference has to do with if you're a guest or a homeowner, not with Rav Papa's explanation that it then depends if you're traveling or not. Rav Zvid says, "Li'odam kedam mikara." Really, as we said before, kan b'achsanai, kan b'balabayas. It depends if you're a guest or a homeowner. And even if you're not traveling, it has nothing to do with traveling. Achsanai, even the less an achsanai that doesn't have any wood, so katziknim. They made him like the people that are miserly. And that what do the misers do? They go to the temple to burn it over there. So he doesn't have wood either. He goes to the miserly, in their mind, they don't have any wood.
So the guests are now like the misers.
It's already invested. So the guest is similar to the miser. He doesn't have wood. Okay. Tanarabanan was taught in the Brisa. Very interesting. Someone, when you go to a party, so they serve food. So you're allowed to eat the food, of course, that's what it's meant for. But you're not supposed to take it home with you. They serve it for food over there. Dessert sometimes that you take home for your wife. But officially it's meant for the party. Here, someone goes to the temple. He wants to take home the wood from the temple that's being distributed for people that are burning their carbon that became puzzle. But he's going to take the wood home to burn it at home. Ein Shemlan, we don't allow you to do that. We don't allow you to do that. There's a concern that you're going to end up using that wood is allowed to be used for burning sacrifices. It was dedicated to be burned on the altar, but also it could be used for burning sacrifices. But we're afraid if you're going to take it home, you're going to use it for something else as well. What about the other way? Someone goes to the temple and he brings his own wood with him. This happens. People go to the shul, to the kiddush. They bring their own bag of food that they're going to eat. He shows up at the temple. He has his own. He has his own wood. So in Shemla, they don't let you do that either. They don't let you do that either. Why not? The Gemara says, we understand taking home temple wood to your house. You may have some leftover wood that you got from the temple. You're using it for what its purpose was. You're burning it as a sacrifice, but it may be left over, and you're going to end up using it for something else. That's a problem. So don't take the wood home. What's the problem if you bring some extra, your own stash of wood to the temple? What's going to be bad? If that's going to happen, then there's going to be people that are showing up with their wood. Someone doesn't have wood. We say, no, we're going to standardize this. We don't want anyone to be ashamed here. People are going to start looking, oh, you didn't bring your wood? But, so the temple gives out the wood. Rabbi says there's another concern. There's a concern that when you bring your own food, not your own food, your own wood, comparing it to my muscle, and then you walk back home afterwards with your bag, it looks like you just took wood from the temple and you're on your way, but even though that was your own. You brought it, but walking back, not everyone knows that you brought it. They just say, oh, you're taking I remember I walked out of shul once. I had my own siddur. Someone says, "Leave the siddur here." Okay, my benayo is a chshad. Okay, what's the difference between Rabbi Yosef and Rava? Just teacher student there. Abaye is the main student of Rabbi Yosef. Rava is also. It could be nayo daisikani v'charyusad lechazi l'maracha. An interesting difference is, let's say he brought types of wood that the Beis Hamikdash doesn't use. He brought his own wood that everyone can recognize That's not Beis Hamikdash quality wood. He brought canes of or palm trees or something. So kani is cane. It's like the English word cane. I guess it means like reeds or sticks. In Chariusa are palm fronds, but what we use here for stuff. That's not used on the altar. So everyone knows that's not temple wood. So if you take it home, there would be no problem. However, when you get there, some people may not have their own wood. They'll be embarrassed. Tanan Hassam was taught in another place, Mesachtes Tamid, Reisha Maimad, Hayamaimad Asatmeim Al Shara Mizrah. Reisha Maimad, what happened is the Kayanim were divided into 24 groups. And the Yisraelim were also divided into 24 groups along with them. So when the family of Kayanim was serving in the temple, there was also a group of Yisraelim that would go along and participate or stay in they would fast. I'm not sure if they were in Yerushalayim. They would participate somehow as representatives of the Jewish people. And the Israelim.
Representatives, well, the Kayanim are representatives for the Jewish people.
Representatives for the whole world. Yeah, but the Kayanim are divided up. In other words, the family of Kayanim that's there that week, right, are the Kayanim for that week. But then there's a representative of the Israelim, and that's also families that are representing the Israelim for that week. It's the Ma'amadis is called. And they had special prayers, and let's say one of them became Tamei. So the Reish HaMaimad would have him stand on Shara Mizrah, on the eastern gate. My time, what's the reason? Amrav Yosef Kedei Levaishan, to embarrass him. He should have been more careful. He gets 1 week of the year to go. That 1 week he has to, he can't be careful. He gets, I don't know, maybe it's even divided up for days, a week, and then it's divided into 6 or 7 days. He has to stand outside the eastern gate. He's Tamei and he's going to go back home. Rava says, why does he stand there? If you see him, if this wouldn't be the case, you would think that why is he going home? We put him over there because he's Tamei. Why do you have to do that? Could think that maybe he's going to work. He found something else to do more important than my mother's. He's going to the office. My binayo, what's the difference between these two interpretations? Is it because they stand him there just to embarrass him, or is it because no one should think that he's just going home because he's going to the office? Now everyone knows that the problem is that he's Tamei. So it could be nayo nifanki. The difference is if they know that the guy never had work anyway. So they know he's not going home because he has anything to do. That has nothing to do. So such a person wouldn't have had to stand there. If it's because we're afraid that people think, oh, he's going to the office, he's so busy. Inami, the Kagadol Shishura, or maybe there's several pshatim here. Maybe his job is that he's twisting rope, which is very low pay. Would be data entry today. Is that true? Actually, the star by me is by, the note that says the halacha is on Rava in Pnei Chashad. But that doesn't mean anything. Right? Okay. If that's the case, if he has this low-paying job, then we don't suspect that he's going home because he has more important things. We would assume that it would be because he's Tamei anyway. Why do you have to stand him there? So the only reason could be because Kedei Levaishan, that he should have been more careful. He has 1 day a year, or 1 day, 2 days a year probably, because 24 weeks, 24. So he should have been more careful. We have a new Mishnah now.
Rabbi Smith.
Yeah.
The tzitz don't help him?
Oh, the tzitz would help for a sacrifice that was brought and there was tumah. After the fact, possibly before the fact, if it's tumas time, But this is a fellow that can't be in the base of English because he himself is tummy. Not that there was meat that was tummy or something like that.
Okay.
Blood was tummy. Okay, the next Mishnah says, talking about what you do with this sacrifice that became invalid and when you destroy it. So you shouldn't be destroying the sacrifice, but this is invalid, so you destroy it. However, it could be that it's not that invalid, and you have to add another sort of, let it become totally invalid before you destroy it. So the first thing is the Korban Pesach itself that left the area where it's allowed to be, or the Korban Pesach itself that became tamei, you serve miyad, you burn it right away. There's nothing worse than that. It's totally tamei. It's the sacrifice itself. What else could go wrong? That gets burnt right away. Nitma abayla mashemesu. Let's say not the sacrifice itself. The sacrifice itself is fine. The owners either became tamei or died. So then the sacrifice shouldn't be destroyed because you have to wait for the sacrifice itself to become invalid to destroy it. Otherwise, it's like mistreating the sacrifice. So Tuba you let it stay overnight. Yisarif b'shisha aser, you can't burn it on Yom Tov. You have to burn it on the 16th. Rabbi Yechon ben Breka Omer, after Yisarif miyad l'pishein le'echem. Rabbi Yechon ben Breka says you burn it right away.
On Yom Tov.
Now, it's probably talking about it's still the 14th in the afternoon. On Yom Tov itself would be a problem. I mean, I'm not seeing that chiddush here. It could technically be the 14th, and probably the halach is. Yeah, but I see Rashi says Pesach Shnit Meshutz Yisarf Miyad Ba'arba Asar on the 14th. That's probably the diuk there. That it would be before Pesach. Yeah, that's an important one. Okay. Yeah, Rashi says B'yom Tov le'matzisaref. Can't burn it on Yom Tov, so that's clear. So we have a machlokes here regarding if the owner is tamei or passed away, what to do with the sacrifice. Rabbi Yechon ben Breka says burn it right away, and the Tanakama says no. You have to wait till something becomes wrong with the actual sacrifice itself. Which what could go wrong? You leave it overnight. That's wrong and it's invalid. We're going to go through the sources for what you do with impure sacrifices or the owners. What's the biblical sources for this? When the Korban Pesach becomes tamei, we understand that you burn it right away because it says it says you burn it with fire. It's talking about kachim kalam over there, sacrificial meat. But one of the other cases in the Mishnah was either the meat became tamei or it left the area, the confined area where the meat was allowed to be. It left that area, and it says that you burn it also immediately. Where do you know that sort of meat is burnt immediately? So it says Tiksiv, Ein le'yuvas dam ala kodesh pnima. What's happening over there is that this is the inauguration of the tabernacle, and it's on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And there's sacrifices that are inauguration sacrifices, and then there's also regular sacrifices because it's Rosh Chodesh. Now, on that day, the sons of Aaron died. Now, Aaron is an Einan, but nevertheless, a Kohen Gadol is allowed to do the service as an Einan. So any of the sacrifices that were special inauguration sacrifices are supposed to be treated as a regular sacrifice, and no exception is made because of Aninas, because of the mourning that's going on. However, what about the regular sacrifices that are there? So it turned out that the regular sacrifice they burnt. There was a Rosh Chodesh Sa'ir that was burnt, a korban chatas that was brought because of Rosh Chodesh that was burnt. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Aaron, why was this burnt? The special dispensation today because it's inauguration that we eat the sacrifice even though there's an einan. He says, yeah, but that was only for those irregular sacrifices that were brought for the inauguration. This was a regular sacrifice. But in the conversation, it went like this. He said, Moshe Rabbeinu says, was the blood brought inside the sanctuary? Now, there's a rule that chatas, that the blood is brought inside the sanctuary, whether that's how it's supposed to be, because it's a special chatas called the chatas pnimis, the sacrifice itself is burnt, or that was done by mistake, and it was supposed to be outside, but you brought it inside by mistake. In both of those cases, the chatas is burnt. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, why did you burn the chatas? Was the blood brought inside? Moshe tells Aaron, why didn't you eat the chatas? Did you bring the blood inside? He says, no, I didn't. So maybe you brought it outside the confined area where it's allowed to be. No, I didn't. It was in the sanctuary the whole time. Nothing else went wrong. So Moshe Rabbeinu was getting angry at Aaron, saying, why did you not treat the sacrifice the way you should have? You should have eaten it. Now, in the end, Aaron was correct that this was a regular sacrifice that has to be treated as it would regularly. Okay, Michlal, but whatever the case is, we were looking for a specific detail here. The inafka, that if it would have gone out of the confined area, inami ayal dama lifnim, or else the blood would have been brought inside, basreifihi, then it would have been burnt. So now we have our source for a sacrifice that left the confined area, that it's burnt. Bishleim and Nitma, the Gemara says, okay, when it came to something that was tamei, gali rachmana b'kachim kalim, that pasuk that says v'abasar shiga b'chol tamei, the first pasuk that we quoted, that was dealing with a second level of sanctification. There's two types of sacrifices. There's kachik kachim and kachik kalim. Kachik kalim is very holy. Kachik kalim is a little holy. Now the kachik kachim is kept in the Beis Hamikdash itself. Kachik kalim is eaten in Yerushalayim. It's a lower level of holiness. We said the verse that you quoted, that you burn flesh that became tamei. You burn the carbon that became tamei. That was kachik kalim. It's talking about kachik kalim. Excellent. We have a source. Good. Kolshkin kachik kachim. For sure, if it was kachik kachim, for sure you burn it. When it comes to yaitze, that the flesh was taken outside, where did we learn that from? From a conversation between Moshe and Aaron on the first day of Nisan. What sacrifice was that? It was a carbon chatas. And we said that if it would have been brought out, it would have needed to be burnt. We don't know anything under a carbon chatas. Carbon chatas is kachik kachim. What about other sacrifices that alone? You never taught anything about them. Vesu, another problem is, Hadatanya, we have a brisa. Londama, say the blood stayed overnight, but it doesn't have to be overnight. It stayed past shkia. That's already considered blonde. Blonde means it rested. Nishbach dama, or the blood spilled. Yatsa dama chutz l'klarma, the blood went out from the confined area. The kaimalan b'sreifa minalan. Where do you know that you burn it? Nafkalan midrab Shimon. The language of this brisa is strange. I mean, Lon Dama Nishbach Dama Yatzadama Chuslaklam sounds like a brisa. The Kaimalam B'Streifa Minalan does not sound like the language of a brisa. Maybe what it means is, I don't know. I don't know. Hadatanya, it introduced this Vasu. Hadatanya, this said was taught in a brisa. It's a little choppy for a brisa. I don't know. So Nafkalan Mid Reb Shimon. We learned it from Reb Shimon. The Tanya was taught in the brisa. Reb Shimon Aimer. Maybe this is what it means. It means Hadatanya. This was taught in the brisa that we're quoting from Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon Aimer Bakaydish Beish Tisarif. Was the blood brought into the sanctuary? If the blood is brought into the sanctuary, the pasuk says, then you burn it in fire. Then that chatas you burn. Limit ala chatas says shrifasa b'kodesh. Reb Shimon reads the pasuk slightly different than the way we would with when we put the commas in. The comma would tell me if the blood is brought inside the holies, then you burn it. Reb Shimon reads it, you burn it in the holies. But that doesn't mean in the holies, it means you burn it in a place of holiness. I only know about a korban chatas. How do I know other things that became invalid that are also burnt in the temple? Talmud Laimar, v'chol, supposed to be v'chol, any sacrifice that, B'kodesh, beis tisareh. We're missing the dots in the old, they didn't have that in the Gemara. Sometimes it says chulu, but in the middle of a pasuk, and then to complete it, the Gaimer would say by a pasuk. B'kodesh beis tisareh. Okay, so we have any of these things are that were supposed to be done properly, and they weren't. So it's burnt in the holy area. Ashkan kachim kalim minalan. Where do we know kachim kalim? Elakol psulai b'kodesh b'sreifa. Leishna kachim kachim. Leishna kachim kalim gemar gemirla. The Gemara adjusts this whole thing. You really have no source for kachim kalim, even though you quoted that pasuk and you said v'chol. That would still only tell me kachim kachim. We have to switch our source, and we're going to say that we actually don't have a pasuk for this. It's actually all gemara gemirla, which means it's halacha l'moshe misinai. Okay. What's the halacha l'moshe misinai? That things that become invalid are burnt in a holy place. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, it's halacha l'moshe misinai. Then why did you have to learn from Aaron that if it would have been taken out, you would burn it? You have to learn from there. I have a halacha l'moshe misinai. The story of Aaron is not there to teach me that halacha. The story of Aaron happened to be the story, and they happened to follow that halacha. But it wasn't there to teach me that. It's just ma'aser shaya kachaya. If it was an extra pasuk, you would say, why do you need that pasuk? I have it from somewhere else. But it was actually just a story, and the story included that halacha. And according to what was taught in the house of Rabbi Baravua, this is usually the father-in-law of Nachman, Rashi says he doesn't know where this is taught. He doesn't know where this is taken from. But the Amar that he said, Afilu pigol tarni b'tzura minalan. We learned, what we're learning here is that everything needs to be burnt immediately. All of these invalidations, it became impure or it left the location, you burn it right away. Rabbi Baravua says, like for example, the chatas of Aaron was burnt right away, right? They burnt it on that day. They didn't wait till it's overnight for something to, even though the psul over there was that they were in einin. And einin is an invalidation of the owner. The owner was in a state of mourning, intense mourning. It was the first day. That wouldn't be the case. I mean, based on what we learned in the Mishnah, it was an einin, right? And that was the problem with the sacrifice. Because it was a regular sacrifice, it wasn't an inauguration sacrifice. So, usually, if there's something that's wrong with the actual sacrifice, then you burn it right away. If there's something wrong with the owner, you wait for the sacrifice to become invalid, and then you burn it. It's called tuber tzirasai. You let its form change, so that which means that you leave it overnight. You let some invalidation come onto the sacrifice. So it goes like this. What about Rabbi Baravua, that he says that even if the sacrifice itself becomes invalid, why? Because of pigul. That's very invalid. That's like from the worst. The Kayan had thoughts of doing something with the sacrifice after the allotted time. And anyone that eats that is chayiv kares, such a sacrifice. But he says, nevertheless, Tan Ibatsura, you have to leave it overnight. You have to let it spoil, or let it become nicer. Minalan, where does he know that from? He says, Yalaf Avainavain Mi Nicer. He actually learns it from Nicer. By Nicer, it says that you shouldn't have the sin. Avain means like iniquity or sin. And by Pigul, it says you shouldn't have the sin. the same word it uses avoin. So we say, oh, what's by nicer? It was left overnight. How does it become nicer? Nicer means that it was left. That's the problem with nicer is that it was left over. Nicer means left over. And so, yeah, I don't know if they leave it over exposed, but it's probably in the temple itself because it wasn't allowed to go out. So they weren't connected. So, so the Gemara asks, they're learning from Naisar, but maybe they can learn from the Chatas of Aaron. When Aleph Avain Avain Mechatas to Aaron, he burnt it right away on the day, and over there it also says Avain. Amalach Chatas Aaron ki agavna nami b'tzur l'daris bay. You can't learn from the Chatas of Aaron. Because if you learn from the Chatas of Aaron, you're going to have mixed messages. That Chatas, in that year, they burnt it right away. If it would have been that same story and not on the inauguration day, then they would have had to wait for it to go to stay overnight and then burn it. So the question over here in Rabbi Baravu is that he can learn Pigul from Naisar, he can learn Pigul from the Chatas of Aaron. So he learned it from Naisar. It has to stay overnight. The Gemara says, well, why didn't he learn from Chatas Aaron? They burnt it on the same day. The Gemara answers, the Chatas of Aaron is also burnt on the next day, if it would have been in a different year. It's just that year that it was burnt on that day.
The story actually says it was burnt on that day?
Yeah, they burnt it then. Well, it says that they didn't eat it. But, Darash Moshe asked, I don't remember what it said. I don't remember what it said. But Moshe was asking why it was burnt. Why wasn't it eaten? Yes, why wasn't it eaten? Okay. The Gemara now says, Hashta de Amrinan Kapsul the Kodesh Besrefa, Leishna the Kachi Kach and Leishna the Kachim Kalim, Gemara Gemirila. Now that you've just said that all of this is halach l'meishim yisinai, so b'kodesh based disarif lamali. So why do you have to tell me the pasuk that you said before from Reb Shimon b'kodesh that in the holies that's where it's burned? I have halach l'meishim yisinai that it's burned. The Gemara says umi b'ayles says rifasa b'kodesh. I know that it's burned. You just didn't tell me where. The pasuk tells me where. What about the pasuk that you used at the original on the page before? Kachim kalim. That becomes tamei. That's also a type of invalidation. In the halacha ma'aseh mesina would tell me that it's burnt. Ahula gufei itzrich. That is legufei. That pasuk is still necessary. Why? Salkadait chamina kol psuli the kodesh kegoin landama nishpach dama v'yatzadama v'nishchat davalaya the b'streifa the lesson b'chulin. Aval nitma the b'chulin nami mifsalim mahil v'sabed buvt in the cholim malay. Ribai. I don't know what my word is missing. Sreifa v'tiskale b'kvur k'mash malan. Okay, let me just explain what just happened. We said like this. We said that we have halach l'meishim yisinai. Any invalidated sacrifice is burnt. Whether it's kachi kachim, whether it's kachi kalim. That's halach l'meishim yisinai. So why do you need a pasuk that tells me that if the sacrifice becomes impure, you have to burn it? You have halach l'meishim yisinai. Why do you need that verse? So the Gemara says that when we spoke about halach l'meishim yisinai, we didn't know that we're actually referring to tumah, because we're referring to any invalidated sacrifice. I would have thought it's only things that invalidate a sacrifice. The blood was left overnight. It was shechted in the wrong time. All of those are invalidations that apply to sacrifices. But tumah, that applies to sacrifices, but it also applies to everything else. I would have thought that maybe you just bury it, you don't burn it. So kamash malan, the pasuk that no, you burn it also. So in other words, could have thought that tumah was an exception. Okay. Here we had a machlekes with if the owner becomes tamei, or if the owner passed away, then the sacrifice needs to be left get its own invalidation before it's burned. However, Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, he says that you burn the sacrifice right away. There's no owners, you burn the sacrifice right away. Amar Rav Yosef, machlekes nitmu b'aylam achar zrika. This machlekes of what you do with the sacrifice is referring to a case where the sacrifice was brought correctly. And after the zrika, after the whole process of the sacrifice, the owners became tamei, the owners passed away. This chazi basal achila, the flesh could have been eaten. Aval nitmu b'aylam fnei zrika t'leis chazi basal achila divrei kol yisarif miyad. If before the conclusion of the sacrifice, the process, the owner was already tamei, that means that the flesh was never eligible to be eaten. So then, not only Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, but even the Tanna Kama would say that you burn it right away. This was an invalid sacrifice even before you completed it was done before it was over. Okay. That's the statement of Rabbi Yosef. There's a problem with this. Meisvi. Zeha klal kol shepisula begufa yisarif miyad. The Brisa says that anything that's invalid because of itself, it's burnt right away. B'damu b'baylam. But if it's because of the blood or because of the owner, to uber tzurasav yatzal beis hasreifa, then you have to wait. You have to leave it overnight.
Dam would not be for itself.
Oh, so dam is somewhere in the middle. That's a good point. Over here we put dam with the bailim. We don't necessarily need to do that, as you'll see soon. But this brisa puts the dam with the bailim. And as I could have put the comma, kol shepisula begufay ubedam yisarif miyad. That could have fit also. However, whatever the case is, before you get into that detail, the bailim, if it's a problem because of the owner, then you have to wait till it becomes invalid because it stays overnight, and then you burn it the following day. Now, that doesn't tell me anything about when the invalidation took place. However, katani bailam dumya de dam. But if you look at the brisa, it says dam ubebailam. I would assume that the invalidation took place at the same time. Ma dam lefnei zrika, bailam lefnei zrika. When does the blood become invalid? Obviously, before it was sprinkled. After it's sprinkled, what do you mean it's invalid? So it's of course before it was sprinkled. So if that's when the invalidation took place, so then the owners also became invalid, tamei, before the sprinkling. And you see what's going on? You have to wait till overnight. You have to let the meat stay overnight. So what's Rabbi Yosef telling me? That if the invalidation took place before the zrika, everyone would agree you burn it right away, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika says. No, it's not true. I have a brisa that says you don't do that. We have to change the whole statement of Rabbi Yosef. The machlekes is when they became tamei before the zrika. That the flesh was never fit to be eaten, because the sacrifice became invalid. Well, it wasn't the sacrifice, but the invalidation took place before the zrika. But if they became tamei after the zrika, then this chazi basal achila divrei kol psul machmas davracha b'yibesura. That's when you have to leave it overnight. Everyone would agree, even Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, that says you burn it right away. But in that case, you have to leave it overnight because the flesh was actually eligible at the first moment, and then the kayin, then the owner became tamei. So there's nothing wrong with the flesh. You have to leave, and you can't just destroy it. You have to leave until it becomes invalid on its own. So what Rabbi Yosef told us is that the machlekes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika and the Tanna Kama now on this adjusted version of Rabbi Yosef is that the machlekes is only before the zrika took place. That's when the owners became tamei, and then Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika says that you burn it right away, and the Tanna Kama says no, you don't. So the brisa would probably fit with Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, this is not Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, this is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nafa. Then Rabbi Yochanan ben Nafa, right? Rabbi Yochanan, what's it? The Rabbi Yochanan Amar of Eretz Yisrael, the friend of brother-in-law of Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Amar af la'achar zrika nami machlekes. Says no. The machlekes is also after zrika. Okay. V'azder Rab Yochanan l'tamei. And Rabbi Yochanan now is following his own logic, because the Rabbi Yochanan Membreka, Rabbi Nechemia Amar Davar Echad. Rabbi Yochanan Membreka said this, and Rabbi Nechemia said the same thing, combining two opinions together. Now we're going to be able to see what Rabbi Yochanan holds about Rabbi Yochanan Membreka. Rabbi Yochanan Membreka Adamar. And what did Rabbi Yochanan Membreka say? Oh, you burn an invalidated owner sacrifice. You burn the sacrifice right away. Rabbi Nechemia Mahi. What does Rabbi Nechemia say? The Tanya Rabbi Nechemia Amar Pnei Aninas Nisravazu. L'kach Nemar Ka'ela. V'Aninas Kalach Ezrikavet. V'Chiyistar Flautan Star. Basically, by Aninas, since Aaron was a Kohen Gadol, a Kohen is not allowed to do the service by Aninas, and you're not allowed to eat the sacrifice by Aninas. But a Kohen Gadol is yes allowed to. So since the sacrifice was performed totally correctly, that's similar to everything going correctly in the sacrifice, including the sprinkling of the blood, and then the owner becoming tamei afterwards. And that's what's happening here. By Aninas, since the Kohen Gadol was the one that was doing Aaron, that was the Kohen Gadol, he was allowed to perform the service. All of a sudden afterwards, he's not allowed to eat it. So that's exactly like the sacrifice was done properly, and it's just the owner afterwards can't eat it because it became tummy. So what would be in that case? Rabbi Yochanan Membreka would say that you burn it right away, just like Rabbi Nechemia says that Rabbi Nechemia is saying that it's because of Aninas that this was burned. Okay. Rabba Meisif after Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Rabba says that Rabbi Yossi Aglili would also agree with this. The Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Yomer, Kolein in Kule Ena Medaber El Beparim Anasrafim Asirim Anasrafim Lisreif. Okay, Asirim Anasrafim. Lisreif Psuleim Abeis Abira Blitin Leisa Se'alech Ilasim. There's a machlekes. The verses that talk about the blood of a sacrifice that's brought inside, the sacrifice itself is burnt. There's two ways of looking at those verses. We were learning it that if a mistake was done and you brought an outside sacrifice, it's called chatas chitzaina, you brought the blood inside, so the sacrifice becomes invalid, then you have to burn the and you have to burn the sacrifice outside. It's totally burnt, not on the altar. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that that's not actually what it's talking about. It's actually talking about the regular sacrifice where chatas primis, that the blood is supposed to go inside, and nevertheless it's burnt. However, if it becomes invalid, then it's burnt in front, instead of being burnt outside the three camps. If it becomes invalid, it's just burnt in front of the temple. And if you eat it, there's also an extra prohibition. Amrulai, they told Rabbi Yossi Aglili, chatas shenichnas dam lefnim minayin. What about the invalidated sacrifice, where you weren't supposed to bring the blood inside? If you say everything is being done properly, and nevertheless you just burn it outside, that's what those verses are referring to. So where do you know if you're supposed to do the chatas chitzaina? Where do you know if you ended up taking the blood of a chatas chitzaina inside, that you also burn that sacrifice? Amar lahen, so he responded, hein lihuva estama lakedesh pnima, which means that Rabbi Yossi Aglili quotes the pasuk in the story of Aaron and Moshe. He quotes that pasuk to tell me that's the source of an invalid chatas chitzaina, because the blood was brought inside. Michlal, that implies the nafiki, that if it was brought out, inami ayel dama, or the blood was brought inside, it's bisreifa, that you burn it. Okay. What he's saying is that I'm able to learn from that story that it was burnt right then. I'm able to learn to other sacrifices as well. Rabbi Yossi Aglili has no problem using that Hiras Shah to teach us halachas in future generations. Before we were saying no, we weren't saying that. He's saying yes. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan, why does Rabbi Yochanan say only Rabbi Nechemia? Apparently, Rabbi Yossi Aglili would say the same thing. that even if the sacrifice became invalid, you should burn it right away. If the owners became tamei, you should burn it right away. Rabbi Yossi Glili is saying that. Rabbi Yochanan holds that maybe the blood and the flesh are considered to be part of the sacrifice. And that's when the sacrifice becomes invalid, you burn it right away. But when the owner becomes tamei, that's a different story. And that he doesn't combine together with this the way Rabbi Yossi Glili is doing. And the way Rabbah is quoting Rabbi Yossi Glili. So that's why he would say.
Where does Rabbi Yossi Glili learn Kachid Kalim if we said it was Halacha Moshe Messina and he doesn't say that?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's also my question, Chaim. Thank you for asking.